In 2014, the Silna Brothers, Ozzie and Daniel, were earning hundreds of millions of dollars from the NBA through TV royalties paid specifically to team owners. But the Silnas don't own an NBA team. Yet they still earn royalties given to owners for licensing their team's TV rights to channels like TNT and ABC. In other words, the Silna brothers were earning ridiculous amounts of money despite contributing absolutely nothing to the function of the league. How did the NBA get stuck with this deal? Our story begins with a textile business in New Jersey and two young mediocre basketball players with extraordinary dreams. Ozzie Silna was the older sibling, born in 1933. 11 years later, in 1944, Daniel came along and their partnership was formed. The boys grew up in New Jersey, where their father ran a textile business. Their parents had immigrated to the States from Latvia in the 1930s, with hopes of taking advantage of the booming American industrial economy, thanks to the New Deal. When the brothers were old enough, their father had them work for the business, with the hope that they'd take over one day, which they did. The boys were given an ambitious mindset from their father, a drive to make dreams a reality. The Silnas hadn't come to the US just to be tourists. They came to take advantage of opportunity. The textile business was the Silna brothers' start, but they wouldn't run it very long. Just 2 years while in their early 20s and 30s. They would later sell the business in the early 1960s. The Silna brothers had bigger fish to fry. Their father's textile business had always been small, and the brothers realized its value would be put to better use as venture capital. Around a decade later, in the early 70s, the brothers saw an opportunity, a cash wave they could ride called polyester. Most entrepreneurs get their big break from jumping on board a trending industry. Think of Bill Gates and the rapid implementation of computers in the 90s and 2000s, or John D. Rockefeller and the gaslight industry in the late 19th century. For the Silna brothers, it was disco and polyester. In the 70s, Ozzie and Daniel started a knitting business. Of course, this wasn't a cozy group of elderly ladies knitting sweaters by the fireplace. The Silna brothers were running an industrial knitting company designed to manufacture as much fabric as possible. The disco era ushered in flashy clothes, and the bright shimmering texture of polyester fit the new approach to fashion perfectly. The Silna brothers were able to scale their business farther than their father had ever done with his small textile operation, thanks to the voracious demand for polyester by people trying to look groovy. Before long, Ozzie and Daniel's knitting business became one of the largest polyester manufacturing companies on the planet. The brothers now had enough capital to fulfill their childhood dream of buying an NBA franchise. As a kid, Daniel remembers saying that, quote, "If I can't play, the best thing to do is own a team." 1974. That was the year the Detroit Pistons were up for sale, and the year the Silna brothers tried to buy them. The Pistons were the only team up for sale at the time, so it was now or never for Ozzie and Daniel to purchase an NBA team. Their first offer was for $4.85 million. In case you were wondering, that's around $28 million in today's money, but nowadays, many NBA franchises are worth nearly $1 billion. Back in the 70s, professional basketball wasn't as popular as it is today. The teams didn't generate as much money as they do now. We're talking about the difference between tens of millions of dollars and hundreds of millions of dollars. We'll explain why that changed later in the video. For now, let's get back to the Silnas and the Pistons. The Pistons rejected Ozzie and Daniel's initial offer, but later accepted an offer of $6 million from glass manufacturer Bill Davidson. With no other teams up for sale, the Silna brothers were left with only one other option: the NBA's archenemy, the ABA. There were two dominant leagues in the 70s, the NBA, which most people know, and the ABA. The ABA, short for the American Basketball Association, had it out for the NBA. They wanted to become the dominant basketball league in America, and they made their attempt by bravely innovating the game. Their games were flashier. The players were encouraged to put on a show. There was more dunking. They had three-point lines, a dunking contest, and several big-name stars like Moses Malone and Julius Erving, who helped make the league legitimate in the eyes of basketball fans. The ABA was also trying to lead and poach talent over to their side by offering young players massive deals for the time, much more than they'd get at the NBA. The ABA was founded in 1967. The NBA was formed decades earlier in 1946, with only 11 teams and no other professional competitors. Even in the 70s, the NBA was still the premier league to play in. But while the NBA was the top dog, the ABA was still no consolation prize for the Silna brothers, and there were more teams for sale. The Carolina Cougars were one of the ABA teams up for grabs, mostly because they were a sinking ship in need of rescuing and repair. Ozzie and Daniel bought the Carolina Cougars for only $1 million, but that didn't factor in the additional costs required to build the team back up to the high standards expected of a pro sports team. All in all, Ozzie and Daniel invested $3 million of their own money into the team. This amounted to the total they had been willing to pay for the Pistons earlier. The brothers finally had a professional basketball team and would put everything they had into their dream franchise. First thing the brothers did was move their franchise out of Carolina and into the city of St. Louis, Missouri. St. Louis was a bigger market, offering the franchise more growth opportunities. They also gave the team a new name, the Spirits of St. Louis. The name fit the city and fans far more than Cougars, and also allowed the Silna Brothers to add a personal touch to their new basketball team, a name all their own. Besides brand and location changes, Ozzie and Daniel invested heavily in signing talented young players and renovating the facilities. Their half-decent roster included future head coach Mike D'Antoni, legendary MVP Moses Malone, and big man Caldwell Jones. The brothers also hired fresh new talent out of Syracuse University for their broadcast booth, named Bob Costas. In case you're not familiar with his work, Costas is one of the most famous sports broadcasters in history. He's most famous for broadcasting the Olympic Games on NBC and commentating championship series in a variety of sports. What are the odds? Needless to say, the future was looking good for the Spirits of St. Louis until the merge. The Spirits went 35-49 in the 1975-76 season, which was enough to place them 6th in the ABA and make the playoffs. There, they defeated the defending champ, the New York Nets, then lost the eventual champs of the season, the Kentucky Colonels. This would be their first and only season. In 1976, only a few months after the season, the ABA and the NBA merged into one league, though it was more of an absorption than a merger, with the NBA absorbing the ABA, who was on the verge of financial collapse. Unfortunately, the NBA couldn't find a spot for all the ABA teams. Only 4 lucky franchises were allowed into the NBA: the Denver Nuggets, New York Nets, San Antonio Spurs, and the Indiana Pacers. These teams were deemed the most worthy of NBA acceptance, despite none of them winning the title that year. Many of the other teams went belly up, leaving only 3 ABA teams, including the Spirits of St. Louis. In order to finalize the merger, the remaining teams had to accept several buyout offers from the NBA. In other words, the NBA needed to carry over the ABA's players and assets to help the new unified league reach its full potential. Many owners, like the Kentucky Colonels owner John Y. Brown, quickly accepted a $3.2 million buyout just to get the inevitable process of losing their business over with. The Silna brothers weren't so willing. They had little chance of finding another NBA team for sale, especially one they could purchase after dumping $3 million on rebuilding a now defunct team. The NBA offered the Bitter brothers a few deals, but Ozzie and Daniel rejected them all. The most important assets the Silna brothers had were their player contracts, especially Moses Malone's contract. So, the NBA, in a last-ditch effort, gave them a concessionary deal: $2.2 million for the release of all the Spirits players. Ozzie and Daniel took the deal, and their players were then put in the draft. But the NBA still needed the rest of the team to complete the merger. In a last-ditch effort, the NBA offered the brothers a unique deal. The Silna brothers would sell the franchise in exchange for a pint-sized percentage of the TV royalties. Specifically, the brothers would receive 1/7 of the TV royalty revenue from the 4 teams joining the NBA: the Pacers, Spurs, Nuggets, and Nets. These royalties were theirs for life, and for the NBA's life, as the contract stated. While this may seem like a sweet deal to us modern viewers, in the 70s it was a pretty lowball offer. Today, millions watch NBA games on both TV and social media. It's a big business that could be considered a small economic system all on its own, between the TV networks, the franchises, and thousands of video publishers who profit from posting NBA highlights. Back in the 70s, however, basketball was something people went and watched, not something people sat at home and watched. For starters, there weren't thousands of cable channels to show each and every game, only a few networks who were dominated by the much more established sports, baseball and football. Not to mention, the NBA had to compete with NCAA basketball, which was more popular at the time. The Silna brothers didn't make any money in their first 2 years owning the TV royalties. Not a cent. Then, something changed in 1979. The NBA experienced a sudden influx of stars throughout the 80s and 90s. Beginning in 1979, the stars coming from the ABA helped spark a new interest in the league, and it was now a much more competitive championship tournament. Ozzie and Daniel earned their first check in 1979, a check for $200,000, or $800,000 in today's money. Next season, their check was $521,749, roughly $2.1 million in 2023. The rest of the 80s featured new stars like Larry Bird, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Magic Johnson, and the real launching pad, Michael Jordan, who took the NBA to new heights of popularity. Suddenly, everyone and their mom wanted to watch Michael Jordan and Larry Bird duke it out on TV. The ratings skyrocketed, making the rights to said ratings very valuable. By 1997, the NBA was making TV channels pay billions for the rights to broadcast their games. Unfortunately for the league, a nibble of that money was going to the Silna Brothers, who didn't own a team or have any significant stake in the organization, other than the royalties, of course. The brothers earned $17.45 million in 2010 and 2011, $18.5 million in 2011 and 2012, and $19 million in 2012 and 2013. By 2013, their total earnings had amounted to $300 million. The NBA realized pretty quickly that the Silna brothers were a non-productive black hole, sucking away money that they were working hard to negotiate for. To try and close the hole, the league offered the brothers $5 million for their royalties all the way back in 1982. They knew they had a problem even back then, but so did the Silna brothers. The tables had turned. The former ABA brothers declined the offer and countered with $8 million, which the NBA declined, instead choosing to lose millions more. Throughout the years, the NBA kept offering the Silna brothers more and more money, but never enough to convince Ozzie and Daniel to sell. Then finally, in 2014, the NBA wised up and gave the brothers a massive new offer, one that just might change their minds. The NBA offered the Silna brothers $500 million for the royalties they short-sightedly sold them back in '76. At this point in Ozzie and Daniel's life, there wasn't much reason to own the royalties anymore. Ozzie was 81 at the time, and Daniel was approaching 71. Their business careers were coming to an end, and they probably didn't want their kids and grandkids inheriting the NBA's incessant buy offers. So, they said yes. The deal was finalized in April of that year, right at the end of the season. Ozzie passed away in 2016, 2 years after making the $500 million deal, leaving Daniel to oversee the brothers' business interests. As of this video's production, Daniel is alive and well, enjoying his cut of the buyout. Though the brothers never owned an NBA team, they did, in a way, completely own the NBA. Click to watch one of these next videos, and let us know in the comments section, what's the most lopsided deal you've ever negotiated, whether it's buying something or selling something?